Episode 272, Methane. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. I wandered over to Apple Podcast Connect feature the other day for the first time in a very long time. I'm setting up a podcast program at work and needed to refresh my knowledge on the site. To my surprise, I found a few ratings and reviews. One from Fan in Ireland, Mad S. McKeever, if I've pronounced that correctly, had the words, "Do keep broadcasting, it is not a void," and for these words I thank you. And from J Love in Australia, more kind words, thank you too. It is fortuitous I stumbled upon these this week, as 2 days prior to this episode's production date, I turned 60. It is 1 day prior as I write this. Of all the landmark birthdays, this one has me thinking. Firstly, wow, I made it. Given the risks I've taken over those 60 years, the scars, stitches, hospitalisations, motorcycle accidents, etc., it is a thing to be here. Then I'm looking at what I've achieved. Now, that's probably not the right word. How I have made the world a better place since it was than it was in 1961. Stumbling upon feedback of such an encouraging nature does soothe the soul, thank you. I'm still not sure of the meaning of life, 42 maybe, but who's to know? Although I did see a summary of what we actually know at the deepest level, and this too is strangely comforting. We're in an explosion, the Big Bang, and sometimes dust things, humans, and that's about it really. Okay, now to methane. Well, more than methane, but let's start with methane. This compound is constantly cited as one of the reasons cattle in particular, and ruminants in general, are a greenhouse gas problem. And to be fair, methane is a potent greenhouse gas, 10 times more potent than CO2, but much short-lived. Ruminants burp methane, therefore ruminants are bad for GHG accumulation in the atmosphere. But let's think this through. At present, give or take, there are 90 million cattle in the US. There's a link to all these numbers in the show notes. In 1800, there were 60 million bison. To that number, we should add the cattle population of the US, but I just couldn't find a number for 1800. Not even a guesstimate. But either way, I think it would be an underestimation. So I would argue the numbers in 1800 of bison and cattle would have been not too different from the total cattle numbers now. Now, guess what? It turns out bison are ruminants too. This means the ruminant supplied methane to the global system is unlikely to have been much different now than from 1800, based upon these US figures. Now, ruminants evolved about 50 million years ago, link in the show notes. So their methane contribution to the atmosphere is part of the natural carbon cycle. Compared to the methane created by decomposing food waste in landfill to the byproducts of industry, the humble cow cops way too much. I have no evidence, but always a great way to start a sentence, but I digress. This smells much more like a personal carbon footprint nonsense advocated for by British Petroleum, link in the show notes. If the blame for climate change can be shed at home to guilt-ridden developed world white people, corporations can continue to print money and pump CO2 and methane into the atmosphere. By blaming the cow rather than the industrial economy with its food waste and polluting technology, then the corporations have yet another win. And it is upon the methane argument that we constantly hear references to cows being bad for the environment, for needing to go vegan and for meatless Mondays and so on. The argument is added to with the notion that all grain used in feedlots for finishing cattle should just be fed directly to humans. There is something in this, but the next leap in logic goes along these lines. If we stopped everyone eating cattle, we could feed 4 times the current world population on what we feed cattle. Now, this is obviously specious. Feedlot cattle do not spend all their lives eating grain. That would kill them. Feedlot cattle spend 12 to 18 months grazing on pastures. That grazing occurs in many instances on land that cannot be used for grain production. Too steep, too wild, too stony. We are in effect getting free feed from cattle, especially those grass-finished beasts. Humans cannot eat grasses or other pasture species. Ruminants can, and in so doing convert sunlight to food through the wonders of photosynthesis and plant growth. Another aspect often sidestepped or even forgotten by the zero beef mob is the huge amounts of greenhouse gases produced in the production of grain. From the diesel to run the tractors and headers, to the fertilisers, pesticides, herbicides and erosion-killing waterways and soil health, there is nothing particularly green or inherently climate-friendly in grain production. Remember back in episode 246 we discussed the results of this modern system and its end result of 1/3 of the US corn belt growing cereals in subsoil. Now there's also good evidence for beef or meat of some sort, even fish, if you must eat the stuff, as part of the human diet. If you look up the monograph Sacred Cow by Diana Rogers and Rob Wolfe for a well-argued case for meat in the human diet, it will make more sense, so there's a link to that in the show note as well. Now we need to confront this beef is evil paradigm wherever we find it. It has become so pervasive as to be taken as a truth. Such notables, in inverted commas, and I use the word trepidatiously, as George Monbiot, whose misinformation I covered back in episode 158, is a notable serial offender. The evils of beef does seem to be more of a UK than a US, Ireland, Canada or Australia thing, but it is leaking across UK borders. And with COP26 in Glasgow, end of this month, the potential for this nonsense to spread and to do damage in the process is evident. I think I've established over the 5.5+ years that grazing animals in general, and cows in particular, have a place in reversing the greenhouse gases by building soil carbon matter. In the meantime, we can assist the processes that continue on the farms, small holdings and gardens of the world by voting with our cash every time we shop for food, or voting with our time by gardening. And if you're thinking about or even ready to take the leap into growing, grab yourself the free ebook over at worldorganicnews.com. Teach you how to do it. I'm also back as far as episode 154 in republishing the transcripts that the great website crash of 2021 caused, and hopefully I'll have all the transcripts done by the end of the year. And don't forget the Facebook group, Change Underground Podcast Group, if you'd like to join the conversation over there. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back next week.